Prof, thank you very much for your patience. You've heard the Secretary General of the ANC. We're going to come to that a little later. Can I begin with the 15-member permanent panel of judges that heard these oral arguments between South Africa and Israel? If you like, you can add the two, which makes it a 17-member panel of judges. The opinion is that this panel is well represented, both from the global north and global south. The question I have for you then, Professor, is will their ethnic backgrounds matter here when this verdict is handed down? And the reason I ask that is it's got to do with their ethnic backgrounds, therefore, to say, will this be a factor and perhaps reflect the divergent views that people hold in this conflict, which have been quite strong, whether you are for Israel or against? Will their personal backgrounds matter here, Professor?
Well, of course, the personal backgrounds matter. They matter to all of us, and I applaud the dispassionate but very analytic approach that the legal team from South Africa distinguished itself enormously before the World Court. And I personally would like to see a ceasefire and a political solution. But is it realistic, given the identity issues that are in play on both sides in this conflict, but also on the World Court? And now South Africa needs 8 votes out of the 15, presumably the justice from South Africa and the justice from Diga Muksaneki and the justice Barak from Israel will cancel out each other, and I don't even know they have a vote. But we need at least 8 votes in favor of the resolutions that the South Africans have put forward, the conditions, and they could get an unanimous decision. My personal preference for a ceasefire is overridden by my analytic sense of what is possible and what is political. And I think that what we will see, if I was betting on this, and we don't know until it's announced, but that there would be, of the 9 provisional measures requested in the 84-page document that South Africa tabled, which is a very good document if you have the time to read it.
Yeah.
But of the 9 provisions, I would think that the first 2 will probably be punted. That is to say, Israel should immediately suspend its military operations, and the second is an elaboration of that, but it's called for an immediate ceasefire. I think the Israelis would disregard it, but also as I look over the justices and the countries they represent, to get back to your identity issue, I think you could get a unanimous support from the World Court for the other 7 that are focused on the humanitarian and civil and innocent civilian deaths that have been adequately documented by responsible press people as well as UN officials, and that would be an icebreaker. South Africa may have already done more to change the course of events in 3 months than American hand-wringing. Now, that's not my statement. That's an Israeli peace negotiator statement in the New York Times a week ago. And the Biden administration does not need to support South Africa's claims in order to commit to the findings of the court. If the findings of the court were unanimous, it would be very, very hard for any government, including Israel's, to ignore that. And that would provide an opening for a process that the head of the CIA is pursuing right now as we speak on his tour of Europe and into the Middle East, namely to have a cooling off period so that the hostages could be released and a ceasefire for 2 months would be enacted. We're not there yet, but this court decision could help move that process forward, and I hope very much that they are unanimous in whatever they choose to do, because that would give moral force to and make Israel ignoring the court's ruling very difficult.
Yeah. Prof, you've said indeed a mouthful. I'm going to move very quick now on just key points. There's a bold view that if this judgment does indeed go to what you've already spoken about, the provisional measures, then South Africa would have successfully made its prima facie case of genocide. Do you agree that if this verdict does get to those provisional measures, then it means South Africa is a shoe-in?
Well, the court will rule on whether or not genocide has occurred or is occurring, and that's going to take a couple of years. Let's be hard-nosed about this. What we want to do is to curtail the violence against civilians in Gaza and push for a Palestinian state that is got integrity and got independence and got security, all the things that have eluded it for 75 years. And for the South Africans to raise this case is enormously important globally because of the parallels to apartheid. But I think it's unrealistic to think that the leadership in Israel or in the Palestinians right now is capable of the kind of enlightened inclusiveness that led to the Constitution that we all swear allegiance to and are so admiring of here in South Africa. But the next step is to get this wound down, and I think that the court's unanimous decision, if it comes to that, regardless of what it says, will make a huge difference. An 8-7 split would probably be picked apart by the various other interests in play in the international community that are represented on the court.
Prof, you mentioned 2 provisional measures that for you stand out, and I think you may have touched on this very one because I think it is the one that South Africa perhaps wants more than others, and it is that of a ceasefire. What is the likelihood of a unanimous decision there?
Well, I don't think that could get a unanimous decision, and it would not be respected by Israel. Israel would do what Russia did when the World Court pronounced that there ought to be an immediate ceasefire in the invasion of Ukraine back at the outset of that war, and Israel would ignore it. If it would make South Africa feel good, I think that Cyril Ramaphosa going on television to explain the decision, whatever it is a good move for a country that is preoccupied with its own election, as is America right now for 2024. But this conflict in the Middle East has polarized our own politics, and in both democracies. And I think it's incumbent upon the leadership to overcome that and to protect the Palestinian people, for heaven's sakes, who have suffered absolutely enormously in the course of Israeli revenge for October 7th killings by Hamas. But there are more stakeholders in this conflict than that binary suggests, either the right wing of Israel or the Hamas party in Gaza. So this is a huge opportunity that South Africa has given the world to wind this thing down by supporting all of the 7 provisions of the memorandum that South Africa submitted.
Yeah.
But perhaps I'm just being an analyst. I think there's not the support from all of the BRICS, for example, on military. I mean, how could Russia, which is prosecuting a war against Ukraine, sign on to that since it's already ignored it? But I think it could endorse the deputy head of the court, as could the American head of the court, Joan Donoghue, which would be an enormous step forward to having Russia, China, the U.S., Brazil, India all sign on to the provisions that would set the stage for a long-term determination of whether genocide has been committed or not. That's going to take years.
Very briefly on this last point, Professor, the question of jurisdiction. There are those who say the court may just dismiss this case on that particular technicality, that there was no dispute between South Africa and Israel to begin with. How strong a case did South Africa make there that there was a dispute?
Oh, a very strong case. This is a part of my 4 scenarios that I've been playing with, and I don't think that first scenario is realistic at all. This court wants to pronounce on this issue from South Africa. That I'm convinced. So it's a question of whether they buy all of the South African provisions or just some of the South African provisions, and I'm betting that they will sign on to all of those, save the cessation of military operations.
If there is, Professor, a tacit inclination in this judgment that indeed what Israel is engaged in Gaza amounts to genocide, how do you think that will color the relationship for those countries that have been standing with Israel, key among them the United States, particularly their relationship with us?
Well, look, 210 congresspeople have vented their disgust at, according to the headlines here, of the U.S. Of the South African position, but those congressmen don't really count. What counts right now is the Biden administration and the fact that Anthony Blinken telephoned Nalandi Pandor before she headed off to The Hague strikes me as the right move. And the official statement, which I won't belabor right now, but that it was issued after that phone call, suggests to me that the U.S. and South Africa are closer together on this than the press reports would suggest. I may be wrong, but that's my analysis of Biden is in a box, and he's got 57% of the voters are critical of his policies in the Middle East, and particularly young voters, and he's in a very tight election with Trump. And I think it's in South Africa's interest and the world's interest to have not another Trump administration, but that's a whole other subject that I won't belabor.
John Stremlau, Professor, thank you very much. He is an international relations expert.